Good afternoon, everyone. This is OG Rose. Today we're going to be interviewing the one and only Bernard Hankins about his recent TED Talk, Integrating People of Color. We're delighted to have him here, a talented poet, talented musician, talented artist, creative all around. There's no one like Mr. Hankins. Thank you for being here today, Bernard.
Thank you. Don't forget philosopher.
Philosopher, you
Musician.
name it, he does it. It's quite extraordinary. His Bernard talks are absolutely not to be missed. The endless revelations abound in them. And Mr. Hankins, if you wouldn't mind, just tell us about what your TED talk entailed. What was your main points that you wanted to hit on?
Well, in a nutshell, the integrating people of color is a play on words of integrating people of colors. And that, we use that term analogy to talk about non-white people, but I'm doing a word flip as to say there are some people who think in black and white as in logic. And people say, oh, everything isn't so black and white, so sort of binary thinking. But then people of colors tend to be people whose minds are sort of immersed in a rainbow lens in how they see the world. So it's just there is interesting parallels about how this affects racism and other isms. But to me, the idea that a person of colors is going to see the world more broadly will actually rectify these other isms that people are trying to solve.
No, I thought it was great during the talk. The people in the audience thought they knew what was coming, and then you flipped it. You're always very good on the word plays, finding words within words, and you have a very interesting way of thinking, which is to believe that ideas are in words. That if you can follow how words are created, how words are made, how words are used, that you're going to find ideas lurking in the background. It's an extraordinary method. And, that idea that the school system has taught people to think in black and white, and then we're shocked when people think in black and white, kind of the irony of that. Do you have thoughts on the school system in that line of thought?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I say in the talk is we teach people to narrow down their choices, multiple choice.
Right.
And then we're surprised when they think narrow-mindedly. That phrase is used to describe a person whose worldview is very short-sighted and can't really see anything other than their own point of view. And it's like, well, the only way for a person to get that way is for their mind to be trained in that manner. Like when you're a little kid, you don't start just looking at people and like, oh, I just missed that person. I just missed that person. You enter the world very spectrum, open-minded, wide-angle view. So when you get into the school system, it's not that math and science are wrong. It's not that math and science are unimportant. It's just that if you're only training that muscle of the brain, the left brain, not the left and the right brain, you're going to have imbalanced approach to life. It's like if you went to the gym and only worked on upper body,
Right.
You'd be out of proportion. People are, wow, you really have strong upper body, but you can't move anything with your legs. It's like,
Right.
well, I've only ever worked on my upper body. So if you teach kids to only, exclude, dismiss, discriminate, see which one doesn't look like the rest. Like, how are you confused when they also take that approach outside of the classroom?
Right. Right there where you said, narrow options, narrow-minded, that sort of play on the words. You don't really see that in Aristotle or Plato or anyone, and yet that's so powerful because we really do need that hip hop spoken word philosophy. It's been entirely missing, and just that whole idea of how you're able to make something so obvious and yet isn't obvious come to light. You say, well, we teach kids to think in multiple choices, right and wrong, and then they go out in the world and we're shocked. It's something that's right in front of you that you don't see, that you need that hip-hop, that word epistemology to bring out, and then it's just shocking. And it is unfortunate that we teach kids to think in right and wrong, and then when they get to college, we go, oh well, actually now we should maybe introduce some nuance and some but it's too late. Kids are wired, and then they're still taking multiple multiple choice tests, and we're still teaching them to think in right and wrong. And we've spoken about this before. That also does something where when you look at the world, instead of seeing opportunities, you see things to fear. because there's only like one right answer and there's millions of wrong answers. And so the majority of things are things to be afraid of instead of things to be excited about or see opportunities to blend. And of course that manifests in xenophobia, racism, and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess I should have added a little earlier. I mean, I currently am working in the public school system, so this is not just an outsider.
A3 house, right?
Looking at, I work in a high school, so I work with 9th through 12th graders, all levels, in an audio production class where we have podcasts like this and we talk about ideas. And like you're saying, you talk to a student and you notice that they have, it's one of those things where you hear about something in theory, and then when you experience it in face to face, you're like, oh wow, this thing that I've always talked about is sort of like hit you like a ton of bricks.
Right.
I'll talk to a student and they're sort of, when you're a little kid, you have a sort of open-minded, like you're saying, possibility mindset. I can do anything.
Right.
Why don't we try this? What if? And that was the theme of the TEDx conference. Was a what if.
Yeah.
Like when you're a little kid, you're always asking, what if? But what if we did this? And what if? You're always seeking to ask, is there more we can do?
Right.
But then when you're in high school and middle school, your brain has been taught to not seek possibilities, but to seek the one answer.
Right.
And so you can see how a lot of the kids are very logical focused. You start to explain something using a metaphor, and I see their eyebrows furrow. They're like, why are you talking about something else?
Right.
They want me to get directly to the point.
Right.
But then I'm trying to show them, sometimes to talk about something, you have to get away from it, get some perspective. So you can say, see, it was right under your nose, but you couldn't tell. If I would have kept talking about the thing, you would still be confused because we haven't progressed.
Right.
We haven't pushed the idea. But you can just kind of see in their faces and then their thought processing that I'm challenging them. And they're like, wait a minute, why is this person asking me to think of something other than the right answer?
Right.
Why are they asking me to think of multiple answers? It's just kind of funny, like multiple choices. Like, you should still have multiple choices. As a creative person, you have multiple choices. You can choose from many things.
Right.
But and there's times where you can actually choose all of them at the same time. I know that's difficult for people who only use the logical part of their brain to grasp, because your logic, I did a diagram, was like your logic is almost like a tube. And you can only fit like one ball in at a time because it's in a line. But someone who has an imagination has like this multi-layered level tiers where multiple tubes and colors and different balls and different shapes, sizes can go through at the same time.
Yeah, and we consider the specialist the expert, the one who knows one thing really, really well. And of course, specialists matter. There's something important about that. But I always thought it was interesting how Karl Popper refused to be called a specialist. He hated the term specialist. He wanted to be a generalist. And how today, if someone says, I want to be a generalist, they'd be laughed out of the room. They wouldn't be respected in academia. And yet, a creative person is in fact a generalist, and is not someone who isn't a racist, who kind of sees colors as opportunities, as things interesting. There's something they're a generalist. They're open to general humanity, as opposed to, well, I'm white, so I only deal with white people. And just that way of thinking, to view difference as opportunity, and also an opportunity to see yourself clearer, to see things that you want to know about, that the key to understanding them is actually seeing them through other things. That's something the specialist mentality we have today won't allow. And also the specialist won't allow us to find truth between ideas. It has to be in a field, but there's so much lurking between fields. Just like we want people to go between cultures, to move between cultures. Well, the whole school system is designed to kind of train your brain not to do that. And then we're shocked with the results.
Well, some of us think about, a few, points back, was, the whole point of education is to prepare you for the real world, in air quotes right now. So if your belief system is that going through an educational program is preparing me how to think, to approach life, yes, how are you also confused when kids enter the world with that exact training and act as they do?
Right.
It's like, if you believe that learning math and science is going to make you prepared for the world, then you're saying this self-contained, safe place is training you, but it's going to make you ready for the real world.
Right.
So if that same logic applies, then if you don't teach people how to be humans,
right,
don't teach them how to be empathetic, or how to relate, how to have emotional intelligence, then they're going to be very unprepared
Right.
in the world where there are other humans with emotions and who need empathy.
Right. And the whole term, the real world, makes the real world scary.
Right.
Like, it's something that we're going to give you the way of thinking so that you can survive the scariness. Well, it's binary thinking. So then they go on, okay, black, keep them out. Okay, women, keep them out. Like, that's how I survived the real world, by separating the good from the bad, and being in survival mode all the time. And the school teaches a survival mode, and then and so people lock their cars when they see a black person walking by. They don't take risks. They don't try new things because the whole school system doesn't reward risk. And schools are doing a lot. Some schools are doing a lot now about social justice and telling people that they need to be diverse, but in not changing the way what they teach and how they teach, they're not rewiring people's brains as they teach these lessons. So it's trying to shove a square into a circle, and then they're shocked when nothing happens.
Yeah, the rewiring language, I use that a lot in the TED Talk, and we haven't even talked about the biggest point that I made, which was, imagination actually leads to empathy.
Yep.
And so if you read in Webster's dictionary the definition for empathy, it says empathy is the imaginative projection of your experience into another experience. So I had already been I had already made that discovery on my own through some of my own talks. And then when I opened a dictionary, it was like, oh, confirm, things that people trust the dictionary says.
Right.
Why didn't it say, the empathy, feeling good for feeling bad? No, it used the word imaginative.
Right.
Because I can't physically exit my body and enter your body.
Right.
I can't emotionally exit my body. The only thing that humans have to pretend to be like someone else is the imagination. It's the only tool that you have that allows you to not be yourself.
Right.
So if we had that incorporated into the overall system of school, government, policy, policy, fine, everything.
Right.
If this kind of thinking was incorporated into the fabric of culture, it's not just something we do in a little workshop.
Right.
You would start to see that now people's minds are being taught to think in a particular way, so that then when they approach life in an integrated manner, the problems we face and the challenges and the relationships will now be informed by this kind of thinking.
No, as we can see, ladies and gentlemen, Bernard Hankins is quite the philosopher. You have to visit his website, bernardhankins.com. But no, well, as you were talking, one, imagination is viewed as impractical. It's a waste of time. But then we're dealing with all the problems that result from binary thinking, and we're wasting time as a result of trying to not waste time. What you fear is what comes unto you. And there's also something about the creative where there's kind of a suspension of judgment until you imagine the full possibilities. There's sort of this kind of hesitation. Where in binary thinking is quick judgment, boom, good, bad, good, bad, good, bad. Which then people make split judgments about people they just met, that look different from them. Where in spectrum thinking, there's wait, I need to try to think through everything before I make a decision. I mean, without imagination, you can't have good judgment. You can't make right assessments because you're not able to think through the full spectrum. And like we said, I mean, there's this big push today for empathy.
Right.
But without imagination, all you can do is put your shoes in other people's shoes. You can't put your feet.
Right.
And we're wondering why things aren't getting any better.
Well, it's interesting you use the word practical, because I played with that word in the talk as well, and I was saying, lawyers and doctors are seen as having a practice, and then I made the point because, at that time UVA men's basketball hadn't even won the championship. They were doing really well, but everybody this year is all excited in Charlottesville here because they're like, oh man, UVA, we're number one.
Right.
And so I made the point. I said, okay, imagine next year you said, okay, men's basketball team, we're so proud of you, but this year you can't practice in the John Paul Jones Arena. It's like, okay. They're like, okay, so they go out and practice on some pickup courts or something, and then next year they don't win anything. They don't go to the playoffs. Nobody would be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe they didn't have a place to practice and they're so bad. You would be like, of course they didn't win. They didn't have the proper context, the proper facilities, the proper resources to stretch their abilities to try to win the championship.
Right.
So if you don't give people a place to practice something, of course it's impractical.
Right.
It's without. I mean,
Without
usually
practice.
that word is usually used to mean like, oh, it won't work. But impractical could be thought about without practice.
That's good.
If you are without practice,
That's good.
it's impractical. So yes, it is impractical to believe that the art's going to work because imagination created, because you're not giving it a place to practice. You're saying, oh yeah, the arts, see, they don't work. They're just frivolous. But yeah, we didn't give any money to it. We gave it all to the engineering and the math programs.
Right.
Oh, we didn't make time for it in the curriculum. We made it extra curricular.
Right.
Outside of the curricular. So again, I don't understand why school systems, parents are confused that empathy is practiced extracurricularly. If you have a assembly at the beginning of the year, don't bully kids. What happens if you see someone in the halls? Stand up for them. All right, back to class, to your math and your science and your standardized tests. You do that one time at the beginning of the year. You don't even allow them to practice and do simulations. You may have a little play on stage.
Right.
But then, the 180, 179 days that you're in school, you don't ever practice empathy.
Right.
You don't ever have the chance to stand up to a simulated bully.
Right.
Because to me, that's the biggest point that I like to make is that, yeah, I get it. Like, when you're in the moment, it's hard.
Right.
If you see someone getting bullied, you see wrong. If you ever watch like those, John Quinones, What Would You Do shows, where he's like, what would you do in this situation? It can be very difficult to muster up the courage and the morality to be like, hey, like that's wrong.
Right.
So if you don't practice your emotions continually, just like a basketball team, by the time it happens, you're going to feel very inadequate.
Oh yeah, and there's something about about creativity and empathy that builds courage. That because it's scary to enter into the unfamiliar, to do something you don't know what the end result is going to be ahead of time. But if you don't face those fears and actually transform the unknown into something exciting, then we won't. Why are we surprised when people see someone hurt on the street and drive by? You see all those videos of the bystander effect and different things. Well, yeah, I mean, and also too, they can't be late for work. They've been taught that work is the most important thing, not people. I mean, we and then everyone feels guilty, but there's no rewiring of the brain to change it. Excuse me. Well, and I really like that idea of impractice being, impractical being without practice. Considering that there's, the artists are some of the most practical people on the planet. They just practice constantly, but that's what it takes. And it's, I think also part of the problem is we tend to think of people as either creative or not creative. And so, like, what's the point of teaching it? If people aren't born with the creative personality, it's not going to develop. And yet we don't think that about science and math. We don't go, well, some people are born, mathematicians and scientists, so we'll just leave math and science as extracurricular. There's a sort of myth of people having the ability or not, of which is kind of used to justify putting it in the extracurricular that I think is lurking. But then when it comes to, like, being empathetic and not being xenophobic, we don't go, well, they just have the personality to not be a xenophobic. We know that doesn't cut it, but we don't see how the spectrum thinking, the imagination is actually the secret to that, and so that it's hitting rock and a hard place.
Well, one other thing that I talked about in the talk that I really like to use to encourage artists who hear it is this idea of actors. If you think about actors and apply this to all the other arts, but one thing I said is I was like, what do actors do? Acting is their profession. Well, so what do they do as their profession? They use their imagination. So they actually have a professional imagination because they use their imagination for a profession because, which means they are proficient. They have trained their brain to think as other people daily. Right. If you read a script, you have to say, what is it like to be this person? Good or bad? Villain or hero? You have to identify with some trait, attribute, some humanity of this person. Because every actor knows that if you just come off as a caricature, people are going to be like, oh, that was a horrible performance. Like, you didn't really bring any depth to the character. No one likes to watch a movie where the bad guy is just totally one-sided, one-dimensional. We all like to see that one little scene where the bad guy, at least moves the little kid out of the way, while killing the hero or something. Right. Just a little touch of empathy. Right. So yeah, that doesn't necessarily translate to real life directly. It doesn't mean you're going to start looking at terrorists and be like, oh, Right. But what I'm saying is, the actor whose mind has been trained daily to read scripts, to be on stage in body, literally in their body, and clothes and literally in other people's shoes and hats and gloves and scarves and geographies and languages. You know, imagine what that does to your brain to have understanding. Right. Now, when you go to Europe, you're like, oh man, I've played 10 European characters. I can no longer just go, I'm going to talk in that French accent. Right. Now all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, man, people French, you know, it's different dialects, different, you know, geographies, different, you know, tones. You know, I can't just generalize people. Right. So as an actor, actors have a proficient professional imagination, and they have a practice. Right. You know, just like you say, a doctor or a lawyer has a practice. These professional imagination people practice their craft, and I'm sure it shapes them for how they act in no pun intended, but how they also act in real life, how they behave in real life.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and I feel as if like the way that a lot of people deal with difference is they think that the solution is to treat human beings like brains on sticks, like they're just brains, that there is no culture, there is a kind of that color blindness strategy. But of course that's inadequate. But the artist knows that we're not just brains on sticks, that we're full body, that we have hands, that there's a world out there that's not just background to our thinking. There's something about like pure logical thinking that treats the world as if it's just accidental, non-essential background. And so likewise, color, culture, all these things also become non-essential background, and yet they're very real. And so, you know, with the pure left brain thinking, the only strategy that there is color blindness, of which we know all the problems with that, or fear, or like boxing out. Right. And they just move between those two, and people over here who don't have those abilities developed you're talking about, they just move between color blindness and boxing out, and they don't have any other options because of multiple choice tests. You know, they've been trained to be stuck between those two options. Where over here in the spectrum thinking, like you talked about, through training through acting, through doing the arts, you don't want to box out because that's going to limit your creativity. And then you also know that color blindness makes the world black and white, you know, boring. You want to see the colors because the more color, it's like, there's different. That I want to get to know them for themselves, not just my white version of Asian culture, my white version of black. I want to know black culture as black culture. And of course, no one can ever be 100% empathetic. No one can ever 100, but there's an entirely different posture toward it, and an entirely different openness that kids today just can't have. It's just not given to them. Maybe they'll get lucky on their own, develop it because they have that artistic drive, but it's certainly not something that is given to everyone.
Well, it was funny, the week that I did the talk, or like the week leading up to it, I was in this program where it was like a competition where you make a film in 3 days, and I'm mentoring some kids. And so we had to audition some actors, and one of them was a child actor. And so one of the questions we asked was like, which do you like to play most, villain or hero? And he said, I forgot exactly how he put it, but he said, neither, because sometimes the villain's not always the villain, and the hero's not always the hero. Right. And it was like, I was like, oh, that's a great answer. One, because you're so young. Right. Two, because as everyone who's ever watched a movie, your favorite movies are where they reveal, but he really was the villain, and he really was the hero, and you didn't know his motives. So there's so much nuance that is required to determine what someone is, at least in everyday life. Right. Obviously, if you're going into a war zone, you're not going to be like, I wonder if this person coming at me with a gun is a hero or a villain. Like, you're probably on edge. Right. Like, so I think people try to take a philosophy like this and say, this is why this won't work. Right. You want people to get hurt. It's like, no, we're saying in your everyday normal life, this kind of philosophy is helpful, because how often are you in these really extreme circumstances? Like, oh no, I'm in a neighborhood, which I don't know. It's like you're probably not in that neighborhood if you're scared to begin with. Right. But also, like, you're probably not in those situations very often. We're talking about like when you see somebody in the coffee shop and you all of a sudden start thinking thoughts about them that are, discriminatory. It's because you're using that black and white mindset. So, if you, continue with the philosophical idea of the nuance and what that kid said about the villain and heroes, I'm sure, if you've watched, was it Batman? Not The Dark Knight, right? But it's in The Dark Knight. Yeah. I won't give it away if you've never seen it, but there's this great scene where, the Joker's like, okay, there's a ship full of criminals from prison that are being transported. Yeah. Then there was a ship full of rich people. He's like, rich people, you have the detonator to the prison ship. prison people, you have the detonator to the rich ship. First one to detonate, stays alive. So there's this whole struggle, a dilemma of like, who's the better human being?
Right.
Who's going to make the choice? Are the rich people going to see themselves? Of course, we're rich and we're not cons.
Right.
We should just go ahead and press the button. And then, you have the prisoners who are probably like, well, we're better than the rich people, or we're scum anyway, so we might as well die. Like, we have all these thoughts and associations with class and race.
Oh, yeah.
So, but, if you watch that scene, you'll be surprised about what happens and who makes whatever choice.
Right.
So, there's just a lot there with the idea of empathy and how it deals with who's the villain, who's the hero, the nuance between, like, who's good and who's bad, and again, like, using that in a proper context.
Oh yeah, and before I forget, for everyone concerned about the practicality of creativity, the reason Einstein was so great was not because he was particularly gifted in math. There were quite a lot of people that were better in mathematics, like Lorenzo, for example, but he had the ability to be on a train, look back at a clock tower, and imagine what it was like moving at the speed of light, or to imagine what it would be like to fall in a glass elevator. He had these imaginative abilities, which were these huge breakthroughs, and likewise, those kind of imaginative abilities can lead to breakthroughs in the humanities. But I wanted to ask, there's a lot of, almost as a meta point, there's a lot of people who think that schools today are getting big on the arts, that there's a big push for the arts, that they're teaching the arts. Yet, my assessment is that there's something wrong, that they do a lot of talking about the arts, talking about the importance of creativity, but they're not following through. Maybe the problem is it's binary people who have been taught and wired binary trying to engage with creativity. They're putting their shoes in the shoes of creativity and not being full body. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a lot. I think part of the problem is that the school system, the political system, all of our systems in America have been set up in such a way and been continually sustained to this point that they just have never been a context that has accepted creativity.
Right.
So now that people are all gung-ho about creativity, they're like, yeah, let's insert this creative element into this structural system that never had room for it to begin with. And I guess recently I've been thinking about it sort of like the body rejecting the kidney. Like you're trying to transplant kidney into the body, and your body's like, yeah, we need this, but it's get out. Like, we don't like it. Like, it knows it needs it, but it hasn't created the atmosphere, the environment to properly accept it. For whatever reason, the body just doesn't like it. So there's something about the body, the system, school, politics, general life that is just like, yeah, we know we need that, but we're not really sure how to receive it.
Right.
But in the process of trying to do that, in order to like just try to function, you need a kidney to function, or just try to survive. It says, all right, well, we'll take it. We'll make it fit. We'll make it work. We'll connect some tubes together that will hopefully keep it afloat, keep it on life support. So I think there's definitely that element happening where you see the attitudes of people in charge when it's like they just don't understand why it's not working.
Right.
Like, for instance, where I work, there's certain things that happen where the creativity literally like pours out of the walls, and people are like, why are kids not in the contained classroom? It's like, well, on some level they should be, but on some level it's like you want them to like take pictures, so they gotta like go out to take pictures. You gotta go out. You create music, it's gonna bleed through the walls. So if you don't create literal architectural structures that serve that type of creativity, then it's going to annoy you. It's like people build creative structures, or they build places for creative structures but not correctly. Then it annoys them and they're like confused. Like, why am I annoyed that this is annoying me? It's like, because you didn't properly prepare. Because you thought it was like everything else. You're a system thinking person, so you built creativity like a system.
Right.
Whereas a creative person would say, yes, I understand your desire for structure and safety and plans. However, there is a component to creativity which is just clearly never planned.
Right.
That's why it is creativity, because if it was always the same, you'd be bored.
Right.
If you went to your favorite band 10 years in a row and they were still playing the same song, you'd be like, this is cool.
Right.
Like, I love this album, and it's a classic, and I
Right.
could have listened to this on Spotify, but
Right.
thought you guys would have something new.
Right.
Thought you guys would surprise me with some light show or some
Right.
set design or some new take on the song, or
Right.
remix or a collab.
Right.
There's, creativity by definition just is not predictable. And I think that's what we're seeing now in education and even these books. People are like, mastering creativity. You can't master creativity. I know what they're saying.
Control.
Yeah, you
right?
can't control it. You can't master it. You can't predict it. You can't plan it. You can't make it do what you want it to do. You can be available
Right.
to receive it and try to
Right.
channel it and funnel it. But to think that you're going to wake up today, I'm going to write this book.
Right.
Yes, there is something to be said for discipline and routine and schedule
Right.
and being committed.
Right.
But to think that an idea is going to come when you want it to come, all the genius creative people you've ever
Right.
heard, you've never heard them say that. If you watched Elizabeth Gilbert talk, she just says, look, you just got to be ready.
Right.
And when it comes, it comes.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting because on the college level, one of the reasons, say, professors are given tenure after they get through the test and all that is because there's this understanding that there has to be this space where maybe years go by and then they write the big book. There was a philosopher, Parif at Oxford, I can't remember his name, wrote a great book, but for 10 years, he did nothing. He just sat in his office, and it was like a scandal. And then he put out one of the great philosophy books of all time because it was roomy, it was permeable, it was building, it was growing. But how many people can become college professors? I mean, I know there's Montessori schools. There are schools that are trying to go in a more creative direction, but that's ultimately going to be middle class, middle upper class. There's homeschooling, there's the no schooling movement. But how many people? Not everyone's mom can stay home or dad can stay home to take care of the kids. So, there's still, until the public school system, opens up to this. The innovation is always going to be selective. And, there's that great work, Should We Get Rid of the Internet, where we talk about, this kind of idea, you can find it online, YouTube, on this idea that, and to add some kind of impetus to this problem, some motivation for us to solve it, is that kids are going to be creative. It's just that without school, they're going to be bad at it, and it's going to be binary creativity. It's going to be a mess,
Right.
and it's going to be mostly planking and kind of dumb stuff that, is we talk about expressionalism. And people just assume that if you're expressing, it's creative, but it's not good. And then you also talk about how, clearly art is super powerful with the Columbine killings. Heavy metal people talk about they're afraid of what video games do to people. Well, if they're afraid of what video games can do to people, clearly people kind of know that art is powerful. When we talk a lot about how obsessed Hitler was with art, architecture, and all the different forms of art because he knew the power of it to create a vision. And so when the schools aren't systematic in training excellence in these fields and just leave it up to other people, just leave it up to kids to figure out on their own, the results can be terrible and terrifying and terrible for culture. So they're really this issue of getting creativity integrated into the system, I feel like for people is we'll get to it. We'll get to it. But it is of the utmost imperative.
Well, I think the other image that came to my mind when you first asked the question of how is creativity in the school system, I think the problem now is that creativity is the icing on the cake,
Right.
rather than baked into the cake from the start.
Absolutely.
So people feel good that, hey, look, at least we got some icing. This tastes good, without realizing that the lack of the trueness of the sort of substantive part of the creativity. If you don't have that substantive part of the creativity, it's not going to actually affect life in the way in which you want. It's going to have a surface level effect. It's, oh man, look, we had this art program because we wanted kids to express their emotions. Well, they did it 10% more at a time. I was yeah, because you created 10% icing,
Right.
And it's not depth. You just did it because it looks good. Oh, we got this maker space. We got this art program. Are we using the arts? Yeah, you're still dabbing little icing on top.
Yeah.
You're not actually saying, here, take a nice thick slice of this cake and take a bite out of it. And so that translates in, practical ways in the sense of just time.
Right.
Then people don't understand. That's the other thing about the school system is they don't understand how much time is a commodity.
Yeah.
Because if you give someone a creative project, it's not the same as follow this system and you just go through the answers. Sometimes, like I said, the idea is not there, or you got to redo something.
Right.
Or, if I just turned in any old graphic and it represented the whole school and didn't look good, then I can be oh yeah, just put it on. They'd be we need someone who knows how to make this look good.
Right.
But if a kid just does a graphic, it's good that he tried. It's kind of.
Right.
Yeah, there is a trying, but, there's got to look professional, doesn't it? So there's time. I did a project. There was this history class that got a grant from John Legend's foundation, and so they were, these history class supposed to do these projects. And towards the end of the year, we were approached by one of the people helping, and it was like, man, if we would have had more time to do this, and beginning of the year, if this would have been like integrated into our curriculum, it could have come off so much better. But it felt like at the end we were trying to like glue these pieces together.
Right.
Another thing is like doing summer camps. People don't understand that creativity again is not a system. So I was teaching this camp, and I asked the person like, well, who's my second teacher? And they responded like, well, there's only 25 students in the class, so I can't really justify
a second teacher.
And I was blown away, because I'm sitting there, I was like, 25 kids is a lot, period,
right, for
anything, but for a creative camp,
right, I
was like, there's going to be rappers and bands, and then this group's going to be a group, and this group's going to be a sing. Like, it's not just like they sit in a desk, they look forward, and I say, okay, now we're going to sing la la, okay, now press the C key, C. Nobody's just gonna sit in a desk and look for. So again, the system mentality. On paper, they see numbers and they see this class fits in like every other class. That's the thing that's funny to me. Like, people see everything as it's just another class,
right? So
they see it as just another class, as another system. So then when they try to overlay the template and there's like pushback, they're like, why are they it's like the artists are seen as needing more. Why do you guys like want more, need more, want to be different? It's like, because it's not that we want, it is different. Like, it is different.
Right.
So if you have people who look at the sheets and look at the forms and they don't really understand what it's about, they're going to approach it the same way as they approach everything else, and that's where the clash comes from.
When you're saying like put the puzzle together at the end, have this image, it's like with PhDs, you go through 15 or so years of learning to think like the professor. Oh, and now you need to come up with your own thesis, and drives people crazy. Or they come up with new ideas by just getting so radically particular that no one would have thought about it before. Like, that's the only way to do it, is to just go into extreme specificness. But once you get that specific, nobody cares anymore. Like, it loses its relevance, even if it is new. Just because it's new doesn't mean it's necessarily interesting or something that people are going to care about. And maybe the PhD student says they don't care; they just want to make all their Joy Scholars happy. Well, that's fine, but there's something about creative newness. There's a vastness to it. There's a bigness to it. And you were saying they're always like, why do you need more? Because there's a vastness to it. Because it is something of which needs space, and that when it is sort of growing out of, that they don't want to give. And also the whole, you're talking about like they want, it's just 25 kids. The whole system is designed to make the kids like all the same, to kind of iron them out. And then we wonder why minorities feel smothered. We wonder why they feel like they're not getting to talk about the differences and how what they've gone through is different. Well, because the whole idea is to smother, not to have individual, not to have sort of individual contribution. But then when they do contribute, they're just left to express. It's nothing to train. It's nothing to create out of. It's just expression and like giving off steam. They almost view creativity as like giving off steam. Right. It's like it's excess. Right. We need to get out of the system to make it work. And the last thing I was going to say is, as you're talking, I can't remember if it was Adorno or Deleuze, talking about how systems, totalitarian systems in general, to maintain their rule, have to give people enough freedom to where they feel like they're not controlled. Instead of putting people in like tight prison cells, you want to put them in pastures with fences, because then they feel like they have freedom. So the school will give kids, some creative options so that they feel like they're not imprisoned out of their creativity. But actually, the function of it is to maintain the system.
Well, I mean, I think people like us, we tend to like dissect the problems, and in our own mind, we're thinking like, well, people can just extrapolate the answers. So maybe I'll just be more direct.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely.
So I think, probably what needs to be thought of is having people in place who have had these experiences, what it's like to be a creative in the system, to be able to be in charge to make those decisions. Because until you have that, you're going to have the same people trying to design programs for creative people. It's like it's almost like you need a translator. You need someone who has been on both sides, who says, yeah, I am creative, and I know what it's like when administrative people talk to me.
Right.
So I need y'all to fix this for them, because I'm the the voice of those people.
Right. No, it's I mean, your TED Talk is absolutely outstanding, and I hope everyone who's listening to this goes and sees it. Integrating people of color, TEDx Charlottesville, just a masterwork, and they I certainly hope too they visit BernardHankins.com. The poetry is just unbelievable. The best spoken word poet I know by far. And the poem you do in the TED Talk is outstanding, and everyone should listen and enjoy that. Musician, philosopher, wordsmith, genius, Bernard Hankins, the man himself. It has been a delight to speak to you today. I look forward to doing this again soon. Thank you, Mr. Hankins.
Thank you.